He had no idea that losing $12 million at the Bellagio playing blackjack would lead the casino janitor to save his family company. What happens when desperation meets unexpected wisdom? When the cards seem stacked against you, sometimes salvation comes from the most unlikely places. At the Bellagio, fortunes change in an instant. But this story isn't just about money lost or won. It's about discovering that losing $12 million can sometimes be the best investment you never planned to make. The janitor knew something the high rollers didn't. And tonight, that knowledge would change everything. Sometimes, the person mopping the floors holds the key to your future. Are you ready to discover how a devastating loss became the foundation of an empire? Main screenplay: the familiar sounds of the Bellagio casino floor echoed through the night air. Chips clinked against each other like distant wind chimes, while the soft shuffle of cards mixed with hushed conversations and the occasional burst of celebration from the slot machines. But for Richard Hartwell, these sounds had become a soundtrack to his downfall. Sitting at the high-limit blackjack table, Richard loosened his silk tie and wiped the perspiration from his forehead. At 62, he had built Hartwell Manufacturing from nothing into a $100 million empire. Tonight, however, he was watching it all disappear, one hand at a time. "Hit me," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. The dealer, a professional woman in her 40s, named Sandra, slid another card across the green felt. 23 bust. Another $100,000 vanished into the casino's coffers. Richard had arrived in Las Vegas 3 days ago with what he thought was a foolproof plan. His company was hemorrhaging money due to a massive recall of defective products. The legal fees alone were threatening to bankrupt everything he had worked for. He needed $12 million to stay afloat, and he believed his mathematical mind and years of casual blackjack experience could generate that money quickly. He was wrong. "Sir, would you like to continue?" Sandra asked gently. She had seen countless players in Richard's position over her 15-year career at the Bellagio. The desperation in his eyes was unmistakable. Richard looked at his remaining chips. He had started with $12 million in various forms: liquidated investments, mortgaged properties, and borrowed funds that would destroy not just his company, but his family's future if he couldn't repay them. Now, less than 72 hours later, he was down to his final $50,000. "I need a moment," Richard said, pushing back from the table. Sandra nodded understandingly and placed a marker on his spot. Richard walked through the casino floor in a daze. The bright lights and cheerful sounds now felt mocking, like a carnival celebrating his destruction. He found himself in a quieter corridor near the restrooms, where he slumped against the wall and buried his face in his hands. Rough night. Richard looked up to see an elderly Hispanic woman in a Bellagio maintenance uniform. She was small in stature, probably in her early 70s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of decades of hard work. Her name tag read Maria Santos. "You could say that," Richard replied, not really wanting to engage in conversation, but finding something comforting about her presence. Maria set down her cleaning cart and leaned against the wall beside him. "I've been working these floors for 28 years, she said. "I've seen a lot of people in your position. Mind if I ask what brought you here?" Richard found himself opening up to this stranger. Perhaps it was her genuine concern, or perhaps it was because he had no one else to talk to. He told her about his company, the recall, the legal troubles, and his desperate gamble that had gone horribly wrong. $12 million, Maria repeated softly. "That's more money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. And I lost it all in 3 days," Richard said bitterly. "I'm an idiot, a complete fool who thought he could beat the house." Maria was quiet for a moment, then said, "My grandson Miguel is studying business at UNLV. He's always talking about something called sunk cost fallacy. Do you know what that means?" Richard shook his head, though as a businessman, he should have known. It means that money you already lost is gone forever. The question isn't how to get it back, but what you do next with what you have left, Maria explained. Miguel also says that sometimes the biggest disasters create the biggest opportunities, but only if you're smart enough to see them differently. "What could possibly be good about losing everything?" Richard asked. Maria smiled. "I don't know yet, but I've learned that life has a way of surprising us. Tell me about your company. What did you make before the recall?" Despite his despair, Richard found himself describing Hartwell Manufacturing in detail. They produced specialized industrial cleaning equipment for hotels and casinos. The recall involved a defective motor that had caused several fires, but the core technology was sound. "So you make the machines that keep places like this clean," Maria said thoughtfully. "The same machines I use every day." "Used to make," Richard corrected. "After tonight, there won't be a company left." Maria was quiet again, then asked, "Can I tell you something? A story from my world that might help you understand yours?" Richard nodded, having nothing better to do than listen. "When I first started working here in 1997, I was assigned to clean the high-limit rooms. I was invisible to the players, just part of the furniture. But being invisible meant I heard everything. Conversations about business deals, family problems, strategies for games. After a few years, I started understanding patterns." Maria paused to let a group of laughing tourists pass by, then continued. "I noticed that the most successful gamblers weren't the ones who won the most hands. They were the ones who knew when to walk away. But more importantly, they were the ones who understood that every loss taught them something valuable about their next opportunity." "How does that help me?" Richard asked. "I've lost everything. There is no next opportunity. Have you?" Maria challenged. "You still have $50,000 at that table. You have knowledge about industrial cleaning that I bet 99% of people don't have. You have experience running a company, and now you have something else. You understand rock bottom. Most successful people never really understand that." Richard looked at her skeptically. "You think I should gamble my last $50,000? "No," Maria said firmly. "I think you should invest it." Before Richard could ask what she meant, Maria continued. "Let me tell you another story. My son Carlos died in a car accident 8 years ago. He left behind my grandson Miguel and a mountain of debt. Miguel was only 14, brilliant but angry at the world. I was cleaning hotel rooms at 64 years old, making $12 an hour, trying to raise a teenager on my own." Maria's voice grew softer, but stronger. "Miguel started getting into trouble at school. Fighting, skipping classes. One day, I brought him here to work with me, thinking maybe if he saw how hard I worked, he'd appreciate his education more." "Did it work?" Richard asked, genuinely curious now. "Better than I hoped." While I cleaned, Miguel watched the business operations. He saw how much money changed hands, how the systems worked, how decisions got made. But he also noticed things I had been seeing for years but never really understood. Maria gestured toward the casino floor. "This place operates like a perfect machine. Every detail is planned, every system optimized. But there's one area where they consistently struggle, keeping everything clean efficiently while maintaining the atmosphere guests expect." Richard began to pay closer attention. This was moving into his area of expertise. Miguel started researching cleaning systems for hospitality. He discovered that most casinos, including this one, use outdated equipment that's either too loud, too slow, or requires too much downtime. They have to clean certain areas during off-peak hours, which limits their operational flexibility. "That's true," Richard said. "We always had trouble designing equipment that could work in active hospitality environments." Maria's eyes lit up. "Exactly." Miguel wrote his senior project about it. He identified specific problems that casinos face with cleaning operations and proposed solutions. His professor loved it so much, she encouraged him to pursue it as a business concept. "What kind of solutions?" Richard asked, his business mind starting to engage despite his despair. "Quieter motors, modular systems that can clean around active gaming, improved filtration for cigarette smoke, faster drying methods for carpets. Things that would let casinos maintain their cleanliness standards without disrupting their 24/7 operations." Richard sat up straighter. These were exactly the types of innovations his company had been working on before the recall. The defective motors that caused their current problems were actually part of a project to create quieter, more efficient cleaning systems. "Where is Miguel now?" Richard asked. "Finishing his MBA, but he's been working part-time as a consultant for small hospitality businesses. He helps them optimize their operations. Brilliant kid, but he doesn't have the resources or connections to pursue the bigger opportunities he's identified." Richard felt something stirring in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but something more than despair. What if I told you that my company's core technology, the parts that weren't affected by the recall, could potentially solve some of those problems Miguel identified? I'd say that sounds like the kind of opportunity my grandson has been dreaming about, Maria replied. But I'd also wonder if you're thinking clearly enough right now to make good decisions. Richard considered this. What would clear thinking look like? Well, first, you'd walk away from that blackjack table. That $50,000 isn't going to save your old company, but it might be enough to start a new one. Second, you'd want to meet Miguel and see if his ideas and your experience could create something together. Third, you'd stop thinking about what you lost and start thinking about what you learned. What did I learn? Richard asked. Maria smiled. That you're terrible at blackjack, but more importantly, that you're willing to risk everything for something you believe in. That's either the trait of a fool or an entrepreneur. The difference is whether you're smart about what you risk it on next time. Richard found himself laughing for the first time in days. You really think there's a way forward from this disaster? I think disaster is just another word for unexpected opportunity, if you're brave enough to see it that way, Maria said. My grandson has been studying casino operations for 4 years. You've been building cleaning technology for decades. You both understand problems that need solving. The question is whether you're willing to think bigger than just saving what you had before. Richard stood up and extended his hand to Maria. Would you introduce me to Miguel? Maria shook his hand with her work-worn fingers. I'll call him right now. But first, what are you going to do about those chips? Richard looked back toward the casino floor. The mathematical part of his brain was telling him that his $50,000 represented his last chance to recover his losses. But the businessman in him was beginning to see a different possibility. I'm going to cash them out, Richard said firmly. And then I'm going to make my first investment in whatever comes next. 30 minutes later, Richard was sitting in a quiet Bellagio restaurant with Maria and a young man who looked remarkably like her, but with the eager energy of someone just beginning his career. Miguel Santos was 26, with an MBA from UNLV, and ideas that immediately impressed Richard. The hospitality cleaning industry is basically stuck in the 1990s, Miguel explained, spreading several notebooks across the table. The technology exists to solve most of their problems, but nobody's putting it together in the right way. Miguel showed Richard detailed studies of casino operations, including profit analyses of downtime caused by cleaning requirements. He had calculated that major casinos were losing millions annually due to inefficient cleaning processes. What would the ideal solution look like? Richard asked. Modular systems that can clean around active operations, with sound dampening that meets hospitality standards. Equipment that can handle cigarette smoke, food debris, and the specific types of stains casinos deal with. Fast-drying processes that don't require cordoning off areas, and most importantly, systems that can be operated by existing staff without extensive retraining. Richard felt his excitement building. My company had prototypes for some of those exact features. The motors that failed in the recall were actually part of our attempt to create quieter systems. What happened with the recall? Miguel asked. Richard explained the technical details of the motor failure. Miguel listened intently, asking specific questions that demonstrated his deep understanding of both the technology and the business implications. The core cleaning technology was sound, Richard concluded. The problem was with a specific motor component that we outsourced to a supplier who cut corners on quality control. We had to recall everything because we couldn't guarantee which units had the defective parts. So the fundamental innovations were viable, but the execution had problems, Miguel summarized. Exactly. And now, I don't have a company left to redesign them properly. Miguel looked at his grandmother, then back at Richard. What if you didn't need your old company? What do you mean? What if we started fresh, with the lessons learned from the recall, focusing specifically on the hospitality market? We could build the systems right from the beginning, with proper quality control and targeted features. Richard considered this. That would require significant capital investment, manufacturing equipment, research and development, regulatory approvals, marketing. We'd need millions. Would we? Miguel challenged. What if we started smaller and smarter? Over the next 2 hours, Miguel outlined a business plan that was both ambitious and realistic. Instead of trying to manufacture everything themselves, they would design systems using existing, proven components from reliable suppliers. They would focus initially on casino customers, where Miguel's research had identified the greatest need and highest profit potential. We could start with consulting services, Miguel explained. Help casinos optimize their current cleaning processes while we develop our proprietary solutions. That generates immediate revenue and gives us real-world testing opportunities. The consulting revenue could fund the product development, Richard added, his business mind fully engaged now. Exactly. And because we understand both the operational challenges and the technical solutions, we could move much faster than competitors who only understand one side of the equation. Maria, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. This sounds wonderful, but how does it help Richard's immediate problems? He still has debts from his old company. Richard had been wondering the same thing. Even if this new venture succeeds, it won't happen fast enough to save me from bankruptcy. Miguel looked thoughtful. Actually, it might. Tell me more about the recall situation. What exactly are your legal liabilities? Richard explained that while the recall had been expensive, most of the ongoing costs were legal fees for defending against potential lawsuits. No one had actually been seriously injured by the defective motors, but lawyers were pursuing class action suits on behalf of customers who had experienced inconvenience and minor property damage. So your main problem isn't actual damages, but legal uncertainty, Miguel said. Right. The lawyers are expensive, and the uncertainty is making it impossible to get financing or insurance for the company. Miguel smiled. What if there was a way to turn that around? What if the recall actually became a competitive advantage? How could a recall be an advantage? Because it proves you take quality seriously. Most companies try to hide their problems or minimize recalls. What if you made your experience with the recall a central part of your new company's value proposition? Richard looked skeptical. You want me to advertise that I had a recall? I want you to advertise that you learned from it, Miguel said. Companies in hospitality are terrified of equipment failures because downtime costs them so much money. What if you offered the most comprehensive quality guarantee in the industry, backed by your experience with what can go wrong? Maria leaned forward. Miguel's right. In my world, trust comes from proving you can handle problems, not from pretending they don't exist. But that doesn't solve the immediate financial problem, Richard pointed out. Miguel opened his laptop and started typing. Actually, it might. What if we approached the class action lawyers with a settlement proposal that included equity in the new company instead of just cash payments? Richard stared at him. You want to give the lawyers ownership in our startup? I want to align their interests with ours. If the new company succeeds, they make more money than they would from a traditional settlement. If it fails, they're no worse off than if your old company goes bankrupt. That's actually brilliant, Richard said slowly. But would they go for it? Depends on how we present it. We'd need to show them a solid business plan with realistic revenue projections. Lucky for us, I've been working on exactly that for the past 4 years. Over the following week, Richard found himself in a completely different world than the desperate gambling that had brought him to rock bottom. Working with Miguel, he developed a comprehensive business plan for Santos Hartwell Solutions, a specialized cleaning technology company focused on the hospitality industry. Miguel's research was incredibly detailed. He had identified specific inefficiencies in casino operations that were costing the industry hundreds of millions annually. More importantly, he had designed solutions that were technically feasible with existing technology, but required the kind of industry expertise that Richard possessed. The key insight, Miguel explained during one of their planning sessions, is that casinos aren't just looking for cleaning equipment. They're looking for operational optimization. If we can reduce their cleaning downtime by even 20%, that translates to millions in additional revenue for a major casino. Richard was impressed by Miguel's business acumen, but even more impressed by his work ethic and integrity. Despite having grown up in poverty, Miguel had a sophisticated understanding of business finance, operations management, and strategic planning. Where did you learn all this? Richard asked during one late-night planning session. From my grandmother, mostly, Miguel replied. She taught me that understanding how things really work is more valuable than understanding how they're supposed to work. I spent 4 years watching casino operations through her eyes, seeing problems that management didn't even know existed. And from studying at UNLV, Maria added, but mostly from paying attention to what was right in front of him. The breakthrough came when they presented their plan to Richard's former legal team. Instead of seeing it as a desperate attempt to avoid bankruptcy, the lawyers recognized it as a legitimate business opportunity with significant upside potential. This is actually quite sophisticated, Richard's attorney said after reviewing Miguel's projections. The hospitality cleaning market is underserved, and your technical approach addresses real problems with substantial financial impact. More importantly, the class action lawyers agreed to a settlement structure that exchanged most of the cash damages for equity in the new company. It was unprecedented, but the potential returns were high enough to justify the risk. Essentially, we're all betting on your ability to build something better than what you lost, one of the plaintiff's attorneys explained. If you succeed, everyone wins more than they would have from a traditional settlement. 6 months after Richard's disastrous 3 days at the Bellagio, Santos Hartwell Solutions was operating out of a small facility in Henderson, Nevada. Their first product was a modular cleaning system designed specifically for casino environments, incorporating all the lessons learned from Richard's recall experience. But more importantly, they had landed their first major client, the Bellagio. It's ironic, Richard said to Maria as they watched Miguel train the Bellagio's maintenance staff on their new equipment. I lost $12 million here, but that loss led me to meet you, which led me to Miguel, which led to this. Maria smiled. Miguel has a saying, failure is just success with a longer timeline. You didn't fail at the blackjack table. You invested $12 million in learning what you needed to know to build something better. Richard laughed. That's an expensive education. The best ones usually are, Maria replied. But look what you learned. You learned that your old approach to business was too conservative. You learned that partnerships with people who understand things differently than you can create opportunities you never imagined. You learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're really capable of building. 18 months later, Santos Hartwell Solutions had grown from Richard's $50,000 investment to a company worth over $20 million. They had contracts with major casino chains throughout Nevada and were expanding into hotels and hospitals. Miguel had become Richard's partner and eventually his successor as CEO, bringing an innovative approach to business development that Richard never could have achieved alone. Maria had become their unofficial advisor, providing insights into operations that neither of them could have gained from business school or corporate experience. The funny thing, Richard said during a company celebration at the Bellagio, is that everyone thinks this is a story about gambling and luck. But it's really a story about recognizing opportunity in disaster. Miguel raised his glass. It's a story about understanding that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the biggest rewards, but only if you're smart about which risks you take. Maria, who had been promoted to Santos Hartwell's Director of Operations Development, added, it's a story about how losing everything can teach you what you really need to win. Richard looked around at the casino floor where his old life had ended and his new life had begun. The same sounds and lights that had once mocked his failure now celebrated his success. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was discovering that his worst moment had contained the seeds of his best opportunity. Sometimes, Richard said, the house doesn't always win. Sometimes, losing $12 million at the Bellagio is the best investment you never planned to make. The three of them clinked glasses as the casino hummed around them, full of other people facing their own moments of risk and opportunity. Some would lose everything, as Richard had, but perhaps a few would discover, as he had, that sometimes failure is just the first step toward a success you never imagined possible. Miguel's final toast captured the essence of their journey to second chances, unexpected partnerships, and the wisdom to see opportunity where others see only loss. And in the background, almost inaudible above the casino sounds, Maria whispered a prayer of gratitude for the night her grandson's future had collided with a desperate businessman's lowest moment, creating something neither could have achieved alone. The story of Santos Hartwell Solutions became legendary in business circles. not just as an example of successful recovery from near bankruptcy, but as a model for how diverse perspectives and unlikely partnerships can create innovation. Richard's experience at the Bellagio became a cautionary tale about gambling, but more importantly, an inspiring example of how devastating setbacks can become the foundation for unprecedented success. Years later, when business students studied the case, they would focus on the financial turnaround, the innovative product development, or the creative legal settlement. But Richard, Miguel, and Maria knew the real lesson was simpler. Sometimes the person who can save your company is the one you least expect to notice. And sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of building. 5 years after that fateful night, Richard stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, delivering the keynote address for their business school graduation. In the front row sat Miguel, now 31, and recognized as one of the most innovative young entrepreneurs in Nevada, and Maria, whose insights had become so valuable that she was pursuing a business degree herself at age 7. "I want to tell you about the most expensive education I ever received," Richard began, looking out at the sea of eager young faces. "It cost me $12 million, took 3 days to complete, and the classroom was a blackjack table at the Bellagio. But it taught me something no business school could, that your greatest failure often contains the blueprint for your greatest success." The story had become Richard's signature speech, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he was announcing something that would surprise even Maria and Miguel. Santos Hartwell Solutions is launching the Hartwell Foundation, Richard continued, a program that will provide seed funding and mentorship for businesses started by people over 50 who have experienced significant professional setbacks. Because I've learned that wisdom often comes from failure, and innovation often comes from necessity. The audience erupted in applause, but Richard's eyes were fixed on Maria, who was wiping away tears. She had been the first person to suggest that his failure might be someone else's opportunity. Now, he was institutionalizing that belief. After the ceremony, the three partners sat in the same Bellagio restaurant where they had first outlined their business plan 5 years earlier. The conversation had come full circle, but they were different people now. "I never thought I'd say this," Richard mused, "but I'm grateful for that night I lost everything. Not because I enjoy failure, but because it forced me to see possibilities I never would have considered otherwise." Miguel smiled. "My grandmother always said that sometimes God has to tear down what we built to show us what we're really supposed to build. And sometimes," Maria added, "he uses a cleaning lady to deliver the message." They laughed, but the truth behind the humor was profound. Their partnership had evolved beyond business success into something resembling family. Richard had found in Miguel the son he never had, while Miguel had found in Richard the father figure he had lost to young, and Maria had become the cornerstone of wisdom that kept them both grounded. "What's next for us?" Miguel asked, though he already suspected the answer. "We expand," Richard said. "Not just the business, but the mission. The foundation is just the beginning. I want to create a network of second-chance entrepreneurs who can support each other through the kind of transformation we experienced." The idea was ambitious but practical. They would identify people who had lost businesses, careers, or fortunes through circumstances beyond their control, then pair them with younger partners who had vision but lacked resources or experience. The model had worked for them. Perhaps it could work for others. "We'll call it the Phoenix Protocol," Miguel suggested, "because it's about rising from ashes." "I like that," Maria said. "But we need to be careful not to promise people that failure always leads to success. Sometimes failure just leads to more failure. What makes the difference?" It was a profound question, and one they spent considerable time discussing. Through their own experience and observation of others, they had identified several key factors that separated those who recovered from setbacks from those who didn't. "Humility," Richard said first. "I had to accept that my old way of doing things hadn't just failed, it had been fundamentally flawed. I couldn't rebuild using the same mindset that created the problem." Openness to unlikely partnerships, Miguel added. Most people in Richard's position would never have seriously considered partnering with a cleaning lady's grandson, but that's exactly what he needed to do. "And willingness to start over," Maria concluded. Not trying to recreate what you lost, but building something entirely new based on what you learned from losing it. These insights became the foundation for the Phoenix Protocol. Over the next 2 years, they helped launch 17 new businesses founded by partnerships between experienced professionals who had faced major setbacks and younger innovators who brought fresh perspectives. Not all of them succeeded. In fact, about half failed within the first year. But the ones that worked created something remarkable. A new model for entrepreneurship that valued wisdom gained through failure as much as traditional business education. The key insight, Richard explained to a reporter from Fortune magazine, is that failure and inexperience aren't weaknesses to be overcome. They're complementary strengths that can create innovation when properly combined. The article, titled "The Janitor's MBA," made Santos Hartwell Solutions famous beyond the hospitality industry. Suddenly, business schools were inviting Maria to lecture on operational wisdom, and management consultants were studying their partnership model. But success brought new challenges. As the company grew, they risked losing the intimate, family-like culture that had made their initial success possible. Richard found himself struggling with the same issues that had plagued his first company: how to maintain quality and values while scaling operations. "We're facing the classic entrepreneur's dilemma," Miguel observed during one of their weekly strategy meetings. "We either stay small and limit our impact, or we grow large and risk losing our soul." It was Maria who provided the solution, as she so often did. "Why can't we do both?" she asked. "Why can't we grow the impact while keeping each piece small enough to maintain the relationships?" Her suggestion led to the creation of a franchise-like model where experienced Phoenix Protocol graduates would establish their own regional centers, maintaining the values and methods while adapting to local conditions. Richard provided the funding and oversight, Miguel handled the training and standardization, and Maria traveled constantly to ensure that each new center maintained the human-centered approach that had made their original success possible. "It's like having grandchildren," Maria said after visiting their 15th regional center. "Each one is unique, but they all carry forward the family values." By the 7th anniversary of Richard's night at the Bellagio, the Phoenix Protocol had helped launch over 200 businesses across 12 states, with a success rate significantly higher than traditional startups. More importantly, it had created a network of entrepreneurs who supported each other through the inevitable challenges of building something from nothing. The annual Phoenix Protocol Conference became a pilgrimage site for second-chance entrepreneurs. Held each year at the Bellagio, it brought together hundreds of people who had transformed failure into opportunity. The highlight was always Richard's opening address, delivered in the same ballroom where he had first pitched their business plan to potential investors. 7 years ago, Richard would begin each speech. "I sat in this building having lost $12 million and believing my life was over. Tonight, I stand before you as living proof that sometimes your worst day is actually the first day of your best life." The audience always included Maria and Miguel, now recognized as co-founders rather than just partners. But it also included hundreds of other people whose lives had been transformed by the principles they had discovered. That failure teaches resilience, that unlikely partnerships create innovation, and that starting over can be more powerful than continuing forward. One particularly moving conference featured testimonials from Phoenix Protocol graduates. There was Janet, a 58-year-old former banking executive who had lost her career in the 2008 financial crisis and partnered with a 25-year-old computer programmer to create a financial literacy app. There was Robert, a 62-year-old former restaurant owner who had lost everything to a fire and partnered with a recent culinary school graduate to develop a line of disaster preparedness foods. And there was Susan, a 55-year-old former teacher who had lost her pension in a school district bankruptcy and partnered with a young social worker to create an innovative adult education program. Each story was different, but they all followed the same pattern: devastating loss, followed by unexpected partnership, leading to innovative solutions that created value for others while rebuilding the founders' lives. The pattern we're seeing, Miguel explained in a Harvard Business Review article, is that experienced professionals who have faced genuine failure bring a level of resilience and risk assessment that balances the enthusiasm and innovation of younger partners. Meanwhile, younger partners bring technological fluency and fresh perspectives that help experienced partners see beyond their previous limitations. But perhaps the most significant development came in year 8, when Richard received a call from the Bellagio's general manager. "Mr. Hartwell," the manager said, "we're planning a major renovation of our facility, and we'd like Santos Hartwell Solutions to design the entire cleaning and maintenance system for the new configuration. But more importantly, we want to partner with the Phoenix Protocol to create an entrepreneurship incubator right here in the hotel." Richard was stunned. The Bellagio wanted to transform part of their facility into a space where Phoenix Protocol pairs could work on their startups, while having access to the real-world laboratory of casino operations. "Why would you want to do that?" Richard asked. "Because you've proven that innovation comes from unexpected places," the manager replied. "We want to be where that innovation happens, not just where it gets applied." The Bellagio Entrepreneurship Center opened 2 years later, featuring co-working spaces, meeting rooms, and direct access to casino operations for testing and development. It became a symbol of how failure and success could coexist in the same space, with entrepreneurs working literally in the shadow of where Richard had lost everything. "There's something poetic about this," Maria observed during the center's opening ceremony. "Richard lost his fortune here, but now hundreds of people are building their fortunes here." The center's first major success story involved a 70-year-old former aerospace engineer named Dr. Patricia Williams, who had lost her consulting business when the defense industry contracted, and her 20-year-old partner, a former casino dealer named Marcus Johnson, who had innovative ideas about game design and player psychology. Together, they developed a new type of educational gaming system that taught financial literacy through casino-style games with modified rules that demonstrated sound money management principles. Instead of losing money, players learned to make smart financial decisions while experiencing the excitement of gaming. "It's brilliant," Richard said after seeing their first prototype. "They're using the psychology of gambling to teach people how to avoid the pitfalls of gambling." The system was so successful that it was adopted by financial counseling services nationwide, generating millions in revenue for Patricia and Marcus, while helping thousands of people develop better financial habits. "This is what the Phoenix Protocol is really about," Miguel explained to a documentary crew filming their story. "It's not about getting rich from failure. It's about using the wisdom gained from failure to create solutions that help other people avoid similar failures." As Richard approached his 70th birthday, he began considering his legacy. Santos Hartwell Solutions was now worth over $100 million, making him wealthier than he had ever been before his Bellagio disaster. The Phoenix Protocol had helped create businesses worth collectively over $1 billion and employed thousands of people. But the numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what mattered most to him. What mattered was the fundamental shift in how people thought about failure and second chances. "We've changed the conversation," Richard said during a reflective interview with 60 Minutes. "Failure used to be something to hide from, to be ashamed of, to overcome and forget. Now we're showing people that failure can be something to learn from, to build on, to transform into wisdom that creates value for others." The interview took place, appropriately, at the Bellagio Entrepreneurship Center, with Richard sitting at the same blackjack table where his old life had ended. But now, instead of cards and chips, the table was covered with business plans and partnership agreements from Phoenix Protocol participants. "Do you ever regret that night?" the interviewer asked. Richard paused thoughtfully. "I regret the arrogance that brought me to that table, believing I could gamble my way out of my problems. But I don't regret the experience itself, because it led to everything that came after. Sometimes the most important lessons cost the most to learn, but they're worth it if you actually learn them." The segment ended with Richard, Miguel, and Maria walking through the Entrepreneurship Center, greeting the dozens of partnership teams working on their various projects. The camera captured the energy and optimism of people who had faced failure and chosen to see it as opportunity rather than defeat. In the end, Richard's voiceover concluded, "The house didn't win that night. But neither did I. Instead, we all won something more valuable than money. We won understanding." understanding that failure is temporary, that wisdom comes from experience, and that the most unlikely partnerships often create the most remarkable results. The documentary, titled The $12 Million Lesson, won an Emmy Award and inspired similar entrepreneurship programs across the country. But for Richard, Miguel, and Maria, the real reward was watching their model spread and evolve, helping thousands of people transform their worst moments into their best opportunities. Trust, patience, and strategy had indeed turned despair into triumph. And it all started with a conversation between a desperate businessman and a wise janitor in a quiet hallway of the Bellagio, proving that salvation often comes from the most unlikely places. A second chance had indeed changed everything, not just for Richard, but for everyone whose life was touched by the simple truth that sometimes losing everything is the first step toward building something better than you ever imagined possible. If this story of unexpected redemption and unlikely partnerships inspired you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your own stories of turning failure into opportunity in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the most devastating defeats, and sometimes the person who can save your future is the one you least expect to notice.